Okay, thank you. So we'll continue with Stine van Andel, who's from the Natural Biodiversity Center, and the title is Ethnobotany in Suriname, From Stories to Science. Ms. van Andel. I think your mic is muted.
Yeah, I share my PowerPoints, but
Okay.
where do I see that here?
At the upper panel of the Teams, yeah.
But I don't see it. Oh God. I'm included as presenter?
I think everyone can present, so it's
everybody can share. So there's the little
it's
arrow
share.
next to the leave button.
Yeah. I've seen the thing, but I don't know whether I've seen if it catches my PowerPoint. Let me see. Then I'll do it different. See if it worked like this. No, it doesn't. Oh God.
Please share a window. In the share button, then you go to the windows.
Yes.
And then you share your PowerPoint slides.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so from story to science, how to verify a legend. Now, often in the field, in my work on traditional rice cultivation, you hear a lot of stories and you sometimes wonder, how can I verify if they're true? And I will tell you something about that today. Well, this is an old map of Suriname, but just for a little bit context, I have, together with Nicolas Pinas, done research among the Maroons, and they have their ancestors have escaped from the plantations, the coastal plantations in Suriname, as early as 1650. And here you see a rough map of where these coastal plantations were, so along the coast. And then when they had to cross, or they had to flee into, when they fled into the interior of Suriname, they had to cross the white sand savanna. That's where the airport, Zanderij, or the international airport, is located. And behind that is rainforest and big rivers. And that is where the descendants of the Maroons who escaped as early as 1650 are living now. When they escaped in the late 17th century and afterwards, they took a lot of seeds and shoots, agricultural crops from the plantation to the interior. And often these Maroons are named by anthropologists the most African culture of the Americas, although you can take that with a grain of salt. So when I was doing research in 2017 in the Marowijne River, I was asked by a traditional healer, Ruben Maudo, to come to the provision field of his daughter-in-law, because he heard I was doing research on rice. So when I went there, I saw, we found a rice that was called sapali. And here you see a picture of some of the rice grains. So, and the people told me that and when I asked, what does sapali mean? They told me sapali was the name of an enslaved woman who brought this rice. When the people escaped into the forest, they encountered a savanna. So probably that was the Zanderij savanna, a very large desert. In some parts of this savanna, they found this rice, and Sapali, one of the runaways, took the ripe seeds and shared them among the others, and they ran further into the forest. So the Zanderij savanna was seen as a large desert. Well, it can be very hot and dry there indeed. They also said that our ancestors braided rice in their hair when they ran away from the coastal plantations, because the plantations also had rice fields. And rice came with our ancestors from Africa. So how can you verify that as a scientist? That was actually one of the main questions of our rice research. How can we find out if this really happened? Well, I'm a botanist by training, so when botanists do not know something, then the other botanists say, collect the specimen. So I did that. This is the sapali rice. It is Asian rice, so rice that originated in Asia, which is a little bit strange because people said it came with our ancestors to Africa. Make good pictures, because then everybody knows what you're talking about. Well, luckily I had a friend, Marlies Lageweg. She was a professional photographer because I'm a very bad photographer. And she photographed quite a number of my rice grains. So here is the Sapali rice. But my question was also, can women actually braid rice in their hair? Well, maybe I've heard about this already. I thought maybe we should document that. So I asked my interpreter, Edith Adjako, can you show me how that happened? And she showed me, and my student, Alice Bertin, she filmed it. And we put it on YouTube, and we got a lot of comments from people from the United States until Brazil, that they heard similar stories of their grandmothers, how people hid seeds and fled from one place to another. You can braid handful of rice, if you know how to do it, in people's hair, and when you close the braids, you don't see anything and nothing falls out. I also tried, as a scientist, to find literature on women braiding rice in their hair, at least in the Surinamese context, or on Sapali as a woman. Well, there was only one anthropologist who had written something about it in 1961 when he interviewed Juca Maroons in the Kotaka River. And that one person said, in the beginning, the runaways were hungry because they had to live from only hunting and gathering. Luckily, Sasapa, a woman, had hidden rice grains in her hair before she ran away. And in this way, they had rice to sow. This was the only written evidence about the story of Sapali. And you see already that in this fragment, she's called Sapa and not Sapali. Sapa, so sister Sapa. But what you need to do in Suriname, because much of the information is only in people's head, you have to ask other people. And there I got different stories. So one woman from the Lava River said, I'm surprised that people still grow this old-fashioned rice. My mother planted Sapa rice, but the itching leaves scratched her skin during the harvest, so she abandoned this variety. Here you see that Sapa is considered to be an old rice, and again, it has a different name. Then the grandmother of my PhD student, Nicolas Pinas, who was then 96, and sadly she recently passed away, she said, Sapali and Saana, so Sister Pali and Sister Anna, ran away together. They were not abducted or persuaded by men to come along. Anna had escaped first, and during her flight she met Pali, who was still working on a provision field at the end of the plantation near the Wayambo Creek. Both women later merged into the Misiyan clan, so they're actually family of Davina, and migrated further to the Tapanahoni River. And then yet another person of Juca descent, André Moses, he's a musician, he lives in The Hague. She said Masapa must have fled from the Tampati Creek. These plantations consisted of forest where timber was harvested, and the enslaved population had large provision fields and much more freedom than on the sugar plantations. When the owner of the timber field sold his laborers to a nearby sugar plantation, where the regime was much more severe, they broke out in rebellion and ran away. This is about 1757. And then another woman in the region of Sanlorando Maroni, she said she was already 80 plus, Agnes Abitang Awedu. Sapali lived in the Dapagi village along the Tapanahoni River, but this was after the Juca made peace with the whites, and that happened in 1760. We cultivated a black and a white variety of the rice this rice when I was young. So different stories, different names, and different areas in Suriname that have some knowledge, that have some traces to this woman Sapali. This was enough for the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam to include Sapali as one of the 10 eyewitnesses of slavery during their 2021 exhibition on slavery in Amsterdam. So I was very proud. I live in Amsterdam and I often cycle here, just as these people. I was very proud to see Sapali being printed on the towers of the Rijksmuseum, and my rice, instead of being stitched to cardboard as in Naturalis happens, it was stitched on silk and exposed here in the museum, because people in slavery hardly left any written records, and the only evidence that this woman ever existed is the rice grain that is named after her. And you have to plant rice every year in order to keep the seeds being viable. Maybe you can skip 1 year, but then after 2 years, it often doesn't germinate anymore. So people have been cultivating this rice, if Sapali escaped in the 1750s, for more than 300 years, or almost 300 years, sorry, in order to remember her. But we also wondered, if this is one story about a woman, what other rice types are cultivated and what other stories do they have? So in 2021, and actually until 2024, PhD student Nicolas Pinas did field work in Suriname, and he interviewed rice farmers in their own languages, and we collected together about 300 accessions of rice varieties, and almost every rice has a unique story. But what was striking is that not only every rice looks different, but many of these rice varieties have names that are referring to women. Both in the Saramaccan language, in the Yucca language, but also in the languages of other Maroons. And these women do not appear in archives. They have Maroon names, but they may have had European names when they were still enslaved. And the only story that we can find back is what is left in the minds of people. But we traced a few of these women, and actually Richard Price, anthropologist Richard Price, has written about Panza, and we also found Panza rice. So we could trace some of them. Choa escaped in 1700, and she brought from the plantation where she was enslaved black rice, so African rice, to the hinterland. Panza escaped in 1739, and there's still a rice that is the descendant of the rice that she brought along that is called Panza. It has red grains. And then there are Say and her daughter Yaya, who actually escaped very early in 1690. And there is Alici Say and also Mayaya Alici. Boni's mother, so the mother of the famous Boni, probably also brought rice, but we haven't found her rice, because we also don't know her name. Dus the Pamaka, halfway along the Marowijne River, also have women that brought rice, but we haven't documented the name yet. And finally, there's also women that we really don't know, like Mabapi, that they only know in the Kotika. We have no idea what rice she brought. Okay, now my slide is not working anymore. Okay, so Maroon oral history has been pretty well documented by anthropologists, like, for example, this book First Time by Richard Price, many of you know. But Richard Price also admits that he only interviews men, because he said that oral history is the exclusive domain of men. Women are prohibited from entering deeply in the world of first-time knowledge. In other words, women don't know anything, so it's no need to interview them. But we interviewed women, and I'm not a historian, I'm just a biologist, and also not a specialist on oral history, but we had documented, Nicolas and I, we have documented a lot of stories that have not been documented anywhere else. And women are the responsible persons for agriculture in the Maroon society. So traditional knowledge and oral history about agriculture is the domain of women. Well, if you don't ask them, they will never tell you anything. But then I sent my paper on these women and the rices that are named after them to a journal, Slavery and Abolition, and they asked this anthropologist, Richard Price, as a reviewer. And he really burned down my manuscript and said it was sloppy science and nonsense, and it was wild speculation to connect these women to rice, and there was no rice in Suriname before 1739. And Maroons get all their information nowadays from Facebook or from my own book. He failed to say that his book was written in scientific English and it's also not for sale in Suriname. And if you buy it over the internet, it's pretty expensive. And then again, we were doing research in areas where lots of people cannot read or write, let alone the books by Richard Price. But the most angry I became, well, actually, luckily they did publish it in spite of this review, that they said there's no rice in Suriname before 1739. How do you know? So I wondered, you know, apart from publishing my story about women in rice, when did rice actually enter Suriname? There is an influential historian from the United States that says there is neither hard evidence nor much probability that people with rice-growing skills arrived in Suriname on Dutch slave ships between 1667 and 1730. Dutch slave ships had no access to rice-growing areas in West Africa, so there couldn't be any rice in Suriname. But then I wondered, did they do archival research, and since when can American historians read 17th century Dutch archives? I'm Dutch and I have trouble reading them, so how can these Americans know that if they don't speak or read Dutch? The only article I could find that was from a very vague article by Frederik Oudschans-Dens from 1945 or something, that says that in 1687 Governor Van Aarssen van Sommelsdijk sends 2,000 kilo of rice to the Netherlands. And the source of this information was nothing more than a letter in the archive. Well, I don't know if you know how many letters there are in the Dutch archives on Suriname, but there are hundreds, maybe thousands. So he didn't mention where he found this information. So how can I trace it? How can I verify whether it's true? But some letters in the archives are visible, and lots of archives, most of the archives of the Society of Suriname and the West Indian Company are now digital, and you can even search with keywords. So if you type in rice in 6 different spellings, you find things. And then we found in 1712 a description by soldiers who found a deserted Maroon village along the Saramacca River, and they wanted to set it to fire. And they wrote down what they found in the village: chicken, goats, ducks, turkeys, a large quantity of food like bananas, taro, maize, cassava, yam, rice, sugarcane, oranges, cotton, too big to destroy. So they write what is being grown on these fields, and rice was one of them, as early as 1712, so way before 1739, as the American historians said. And indeed, in the book by Richard Price, in the oral history, the women say and Yaya, her daughter, were said to have big provision fields along the Saramacca River, and by that time they weren't even Saramaccans yet, because later they moved over to the Suriname rivers and they got later the name Saramaccans. But of course they needed something to eat, so they brought rice into the interior and made provision fields, and they also brought goats and chicken and ducks and taro and bananas and maize and cotton and sugarcane and oranges and everything. But some archival documents are very, very difficult to read, and I wasn't able to do so. But luckily, there were some history students. They did a course in old handwriting, and they volunteered to help me. Thijs Elfrink, Anna Bruins, Maarten van der Hoef, and Jip van Montfort. And they translated for me several letters of Governor Van Aarssen van Sommelsdijk. And in 1686, he says, of the rices that grow here, there are several species, white, black, and red rice occur here. And he had to plant rice as bulk food for the soldiers and the enslaved, because there was too little food in the colony. And the white rice is probably Asian rice, because that's mostly white. The red rice is difficult. The black rice is African rice, because that has a black shell, and the grains are red, as you can see here on the far right. And the red grains can also occur in Asian rice. So the red seeded rice can be either Asian rice or African rice. And actually the students found a much earlier letter from Abraham Krijnse from 1668. That was at the moment when the Dutch took over Suriname from the English, and they first took Fort Zeelandia, what you can see here on the picture. And Krijnse writes that rice, beans and radish grow very well here, but they soon will be no longer available because we ate them all. But we still need them. But by investing a lot of work, everything can be cultivated over time. So rice was already present in Suriname before the Dutch took it from the English in 1667, because somebody must have planted that rice fields. And Krijnse doesn't say who it was, of course, but it was there. And indeed, in 1687, as was mentioned earlier, 2,000 kilo of uncleaned red rice was grown on the Society's provision field, was sent to the Netherlands. Well, there were 2 provision fields of the Society of Suriname. One was located behind Fort Zeelandia, and the other one was located behind Fort Amsterdam. Here's Fort Amsterdam, it says Sociëteitsgrond, and here is Fort Zeelandia, and it says Fort Sociëteitsgrond as well. Okay, where am I now? Oh, it's not working. Oh God, what can I do? Yeah. So, in 1689, we have another letter by the Society of Suriname that was based in Amsterdam that said all plantations should grow food to prevent starvation, revolts and marronage, because there was too little food and most attention was paid to sugarcane fields. But in 1697, the new governor, because Van Aarssen van Sommelsdijk was killed by his own soldiers because of a lack of food and a lack of payment. He didn't pay them, he didn't give them food, and they just shot him dead. So that happens if you don't provide food. And the new government, Paulus van der Veen, said, yeah, it is very difficult to remove the red bran of the rice. So we have rice, but it's red. We want rice to be white. And rice is also a weed, and it starts growing everywhere, and it ruins your whole plantation. So rice is not only grown as food, it starts growing everywhere. It becomes an invasive species. That is strange. So to summarize, we did archival study on rice. We made pictures, we made videos of Maroon women showing how to braid rice in the hair. We collected specimens, we read the published history, we looked in the anthropological work, we did ethnobotany, we interviewed people. Well, there's one thing left to do, and that is of course DNA. But to summarize, rice was already present in 1686, as Abraham Krijnse has said. So the American historians, they write a lot, but they did not read the Dutch archives, or they did not read them well enough, or they couldn't read them. The first female Maroons escaped in 1690, especially that's what the oral history of the Maroons says. Probably many others already escaped in the 1650s during the English rule of Suriname. But this is the story about Say and Yaya who escaped in 1690. And yes, people can still braid rice in their hair, so that's not a myth, that's just true. Rice was grown on plantation as bulk food in the 1690s, so rice was present, and there was white, red and black rice, so Asian and African rice and various types of Asian rice, and it even became an obnoxious weed because people are complaining about it. That means that rice escapes from plantations and very likely also grew wild in open sunny spaces like the white sand savanna around Sanderij Airport, the desert that women had to cross where they found rice. So women could have found rice on the savanna when they escaped slavery, just like the story of Sapari. Our DNA research the results of that have been done by my postdoc Marieke van der Loosdrecht at Wageningen University, says that most of the maroon rice has its closest ancestors nowadays in Western Africa. Both the African rice, that is an African type of rice, and some rice that is genetically very close to the one in Suriname are grown in the west part of Ivory Coast. But the Asian rice that is now grown by the Maroons has also genetically very close varieties in Sierra Leone and some other Asian countries, also Guinea-Bissau. So yes, that rice came with the ancestors from Africa. It was just Asian rice, not African rice. And if that is confusing to you, I will summarize the history of rice. 7,000 years before Christ, Asian rice was domesticated in China. Then almost 4,000 years ago, the Africans domesticated the African rice. That's the one with the black husks. It's another species, Oryza glaberrima. Then by 1500, the Portuguese sailed via Cape of Good Hope to the Philippines, and they took over the trade from the Arabs. And they took Philippine rice and they sailed back to their possessions and their colonies or their forts in Western Africa, and they handed out that Asian rice to African farmers, and they started growing it. Then 1550, around that time, this transatlantic slave trade starts, and slave traders bought food for the journey in West Africa. And by 1550, they already brought it to Brazil, and rice was grown there too. And by 1650, these slave ships, probably with rice, arrived in Suriname. So that means when the first Maroons escaped in 1690, rice was already there as bulk food on plantation, escaped as a weed on the savannah. So indeed, the ancestors of the present Maroons could have found it there. So around 1619, the Maroon women escaped with rice from plantation and from the savannah, and they went into the interior and they planted that, and that helped the Maroons survive. And believe it or not, some rices with their names are still grown today. So this is also a way how you can preserve your history. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice presentation. I learned a lot today about this. And for your information, Nicolas Pinas is also in the
Yeah, I
meeting.
saw him coming up. Hi, Nicolas.
Yeah, hi, Nicolas. Yes, thank you also for your contribution to this. Other questions? I see Professor Kronenberg.
Yes, and this is really the wonderful detective story. Fantastic and so. But you didn't tell how your American reviewer reacted when you gave him all this evidence and so, because he must have been ashamed because of his ignorance.
I think he's ready to kill me, but I didn't go. I said to the editor, I will do all the discussion with you as the editor, not directly with the reviewer. But I'm a little bit scared to meet him. I just hope that
it's his own fault. Why should you? You are right, and he was stupid and authoritarian. Huh?
He is a man with a lot of fame. Nicolas laughs, but because he knows the story. Yeah. I don't know. I think he hates me, but we'll find out. I now know that I have to list him as a non-reviewer.
Okay.
But it made me sad that women's oral knowledge was so dismissed as non-existing.
Including yours.
Yeah, that's not oral knowledge. Yeah, but it also means that it has been overlooked, and there's a lot of oral knowledge that has been overlooked because it was not in the interest of the researchers who did that research. So I would like to say to all young Surinamese researchers, even your grandmother has oral history, write it down because nobody wrote it down, and you can still contribute a lot because that knowledge has never been valued in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. This was an excellent story.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Any other question? Nicolas, do you want to add something?
Thank you for the opportunity. No, it is, yeah, it was nice. Nice hearing you, Tinder. It's been a minute.
Yeah, Nicolas, you didn't hear about your Tyro research yet?
Not yet.
Nicolas
I think by
has
the end of the month.
end of the month. So Nicolas has submitted a proposal on Tyro research. Tyre, everybody in Suriname knows Tyre, but nobody knows where it comes from and nobody has written down anything about it. And there are many different species. So we think that there is a whole story hidden there, and I hope that Nicolas gets the money to spend a few years on listening to stories about Tyre. But
Okay.
we have to wait.
So Tinder, the rice, the sowing and the harvesting, that's all women's work.
Yes.
But isn't the trade of the rice, isn't that a man's? But do men not participate in that, or is it? I could imagine that, especially if you look at dispersal patterns or distribution patterns, that then there is another story to tell.
In
as well.
Suriname, you mean?
Yeah, in Suriname, but maybe also even in general, as you went back much further, of course. And obviously the slavery and the ships of the slaves, that was all man's work, I guess.
Yeah.
But at the markets, when people are selling their rice, is that currently women?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and due to the attention we have paid to maroon rice, and we have, especially Nicolas, has good connection with the Surinamese media. So after we published some things in newspapers and so on, radio, the price of the maroon rice has gone up because the story is good for sale. So it's now sold as pretty for pretty inflated prices. In how much does it cost now in Suriname, Nicolas?
I recently bought a couple of kgs for 150 SAB.
For 1 kilo. Okay.
So that's I think three times the normal rice from Nikeri, 3 times, 4 times the price of Nikeri.
And how much is 150 SRD nowadays?
€3, €3.50.
3.5, yeah, 3.50.
Oh, that's even more expensive than rijst in the Albert Heijn.
Yes.
Good. So that's also a contribution that you can do as a PhD student.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.